So we've been looking at ProRes video because that's got the Rec. 709 color space, which is quite compressed and is very similar to that of traditional TV cameras and 8-bit formats. So everything's kind of quite punchy, quite contrasty. The camera itself is acquiring a lot more information. What's happening is the ProRes video is taking that middle section. So it's much easier to expose and see contrast with ProRes video. When you're shooting ProRes film, it's that log look. So it's like without a lookup table burnt in. So let's look at that now. So this is ProRes video. Let's go to here and shift this to ProRes film. Now the first thing you'll notice is that any exposure you had set for ProRes video will be way under for ProRes film. You're going to see it drop from 100% IRE down to 50 right away. So in ProRes film, we're looking at a log image. We're actually choosing to record that log image onto the SSD, but we can opt to have a video lookup table, that Rec. 709 lookup table, appear on the back of our screen, because log images are very difficult to focus with. It's very difficult to see contrast. So what you can do is display the output to ProRes video. So what we're looking at is a ProRes video lookup table applied to a ProRes film log image. Let's look at the exposure here. This is again where it gets a little bit tricky. That doesn't look too bad in terms of exposure. You might say to I'd be happy with that. But if we look at the log image on the waveform, our IRE is sitting at 50. That's way too low to give us a good signal to noise ratio. So what we need to do is open up so that we get more light into the sensor. And that, I'd say, is almost there. What I'm trying to do is maintain detail in this white image here. There's a building there with snow on the roof, and there's very fine lines where you can see the slate through it. I want to have that information. So in terms of exposing the scene, I can choose to put the exposure anywhere by opening or closing that variable neutral density filter. But the one thing to bear in mind is the BlackMagic cinema camera likes light. So you want to be pushing that up as far as possible without clipping. We're not seeing any clip on the actual screen of the BlackMagic camera, so we know the sensor isn't clipping. I'd say that's almost there. I'd probably want to push that a little further, so I'm going to go back to my menu, ISO at 1600, shutter up at 360, so I've effectively turned the shutter off. There's nothing in this scene which is going to cause me problems with motion artifacts. No one's passing through frame, so I'm not going to suffer any strange looking image artifacts because I've turned the shutter off. I'm trying to get as much light into the sensor. I'm shooting at f16. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm just underneath 100 IRE. I know my detail is going to be protected in the roof. So I've just manipulated that to get the best possible image. And I just don't think you can accurately expose on this camera without a third-party monitor with a waveform. Now, of course, you are supplied with ultrascope when you buy this camera. So there's certainly nothing wrong with actually having a laptop here, plugging into the Thunderbolt port and using ultrascope to get my exposure exactly the way I want it. But it's snowing, so it's not ideal for me to have a laptop on location, which is why the next best thing is to have a third-party waveform monitor. So exposure is one of these things. Unfortunately, there isn't a single magic button which I can say, do it like this and it will always work. Because you have to evaluate the scene you're working in. Now, I've talked about the various technical aspects of how to control exposure, ProRes video, ProRes film, and in RAW. But creatively, you have to make decisions about what's the most appropriate for the thing that you're filming. And there's a commercial aspect to it. It's, how much time do you want to spend in post processing images before you get to edit? And that's a big consideration. So in a scene like this, where there's only 4 or 5 stops of dynamic range in terms of the scene, because it's very overcast, and so the difference between highlight and shadow, I've just taken some spot meter readings, is about 4 or 5 stops. We're not going to have too many problems shooting in ProRes video. If it was brighter, I might go to ProRes film, knowing that I've got time to grade the footage. If I'm not going to grade, then I would shoot ProRes video and just keep everything within an acceptable range. Now, the caveat to that is if the sun suddenly came out and there was 1 or 2 shots which I wanted to shoot, which I needed more dynamic range for, then I might flick to ProRes film or even to RAW. But bear in mind, you have to put your RAW images through Resolve to apply a lookup table or a first pass grade, and then export that material before you can start to edit in your NLE. Now, I'm a user of Final Cut Pro 10, so if I shoot ProRes video, I can bring it straight into Final Cut Pro 10 and cut ProRes very quickly. Same with ProRes film, but I'm going to have to grade ProRes film, so I'm going to have to round trip that into Resolve before I can finish the project. When you're shooting RAW, it's a whole different game. You have to pull your footage in, you have to apply a first light grade in DaVinci Resolve, then you've got to choose, do you export them to ProRes Proxy, or do you full ProRes exports, round trip that into Final Cut 10, do your edit, and then send it back via XML back into Resolve, relinking your original RAW DNGs before exporting that and sending that back to Final Cut to do your finishing. So there's a lot more work involved, but when I shot Southwold in the summer, it was a bright sunny day. There was probably 13 or 14 stops of dynamic range, if not more. There were some shots where the sun was beating off the water and I couldn't resolve that information. So by putting that through a Resolve workflow, I was able to capture all the information I needed from the footage originally and apply all the look changes that I wanted in post. So really, to wrap this up, exposure is one of these things that the more you try in different environments, I cannot emphasize how important it is to have an external monitor with a waveform to really help you nail exposure. But it is going to be down to trial and error, and you do have to get out there and learn how your camera responds, how your lenses respond, how your filters respond, to really maximize getting the best possible footage. If you don't get a great exposure, you're kind of not going to have the greatest footage to start with when it comes to post. Great footage in, great exposure means great stuff out the back end. I want to mention something here which is subtle but I think very significant. The way that Auto Iris works differs on ProRes video, ProRes film and DNX on the compressed formats than to RAW. So if we press Auto Iris here, it's giving us F17. That's it, 800 ASA, 180 degree shutter. What it's doing is it's getting a mean average of the whole scene and giving us an exposure reading. Now if I just stop recording here for a second and go into RAW, bring that back and just overexpose the scene as an example. When I now hit auto exposure on the iris, it gives me an exposure of f9.5. What it's doing is when it's exposing auto iris in RAW, it's measuring the clip point of the sensor and just bringing it back enough so you don't see any zebras to give you the highest possible signal to noise ratio off the sensor. So this thing that you have to really get your head around is that when the camera is reading exposure for the compressed formats, it's thinking about the color space and the bit depth that codec will allow you to record in and giving you a mean average of the whole scene. Whereas in RAW, it's reading straight off the sensor. Now I want to just mention something here which is not strictly exposure related, but whilst we're on the back of the camera, on the opposite side to the iris button is a focus button. And what this does is it adds an edge sharpening. It's a peaking function. It's not colored at the minute, but it does make a difference so you can see the sharpness of your lines in your frame, and it will help you focus in the same way that peaking would on an EVF or another monitor that has that function. So it sharpens the edges, makes everything look quite jagged, but it's about helping you to see what's in focus and what's not. Now, if you're going to use Canon lenses or lenses that have a Canon mount that have contacts that will talk to the camera, you can use the iris button here to control exposure electronically. These are if you have lenses that don't have a manual iris control. What you can do is use the left navigation and the right navigation button here to push the exposure up or down. What I'm doing here is I want to see the zebras disappear, but in ProRes video we're still clipping. So using the left navigation, bring that right down so that my highlights are sitting below 100 IRE, and that's a correctly exposed scene. And if you want to go up, you just press that button. And it will work while you're recording. It's not as smooth as manually controlling an aperture, but it will allow you to change exposure in situations where you have to do it quickly.